Welcome to the Spooky Owls. My name's David Saunderson. Today we're jumping into the Christmas spirit a little bit early. It's November, and I know people might go, "Well, what are you talking about Christmas for yet? It's not December." Well, there's going to be a new play, or I should say a new play, a very old play, which has been put on in London by a fellow named Adam Z. Robinson. He's doing Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol at Barron's Court. And I thought it was a great opportunity to talk to someone. I love A Christmas Carol. I love Scrooge. I love the whole nature of the redemption of the old miser, the ghosts, all the cool stuff that we love about A Christmas Carol. So it's a really good opportunity to talk about A Christmas Carol and also find out about how, even after what year are we now? Like 160 years, 170, a very very long time. Why people are still putting it on and how they're finding something new to tell about the story. So, Christmas ghosts, let's go. Hello, Adam. How are you today?
Hello, thank you for having me. It's really good to be here.
I'll say Merry Christmas to you, even though it's not Christmas yet, but you're really in the Christmas spirit, no doubt, getting ready for your production of A Christmas Carol.
Correct. Merry Christmas to you as well. I think that's my first one of the year, so I feel honoured, and I hope you feel honoured. Yeah,
It is
we're very
definitely it is definitely my first Christmas. I'm still getting over Halloween. I shouldn't say I'm getting over Halloween, but I'm not quite there for Christmas yet. But
It's
let's
a
do it.
busy time. It's a busy time for us spooky folk, isn't it? Halloween, and as much as I adore it, and I do adore it, I found myself doing so many different events around Halloween, and part of me was like, "Oh, I'm exhausted," and then of course Christmas starts, and it's all the spooky stuff again. So I feel you.
It is. It really is. But as I said, I wouldn't normally maybe interview someone about a something that was sort of just a one off. You've done this before though, A Christmas Carol. I think you did it 2018 or before lockdown.
Yeah, actually, so this is the third incarnation, I suppose, of our adaptation of A Christmas Carol. We did tour it in 2018. My theatre company, the Book of Darkness and Light, we do my ghost stories. So I write ghost stories and we produce them for the stage, and those stage shows got bigger and bigger, and we're doing some really exciting things on stage. And I think it was about 2017 when we were touring a show called Shivers, which was very kindly featured on the Spooky Isles. We a guy called Jonathan at the Duke's in Lancaster said, "Have you ever thought about doing A Christmas Carol?" And a few other people had said this to us sort of on the road, and I never had considered doing anybody else's work, a classic on stage. But I warmed up to the idea, and I read the book again, and was aware of just how ghostly and gothic some of those passages are, and was hooked. And so I wrote I adapted the story for the stage. We toured it in 2018, as you said, and we also toured it in 2021, which is last Christmas.
Mm.
Um, Remarkably, we were able to tour it. It was around about that time when nobody was really sure what was going on. But even during those times when the theatres were open, but I think there was an air of nervousness. Even in those times, we were selling out theatres of like 300 seats, and I love doing it. It's one of my favorite projects that I do, actually, A Christmas Carol. And as you say, we're doing it again this Christmas, so very exciting.
What is it you like about A Christmas Carol? Why you never thought about doing someone else's work, but so why this work?
I mean, it is one of the best stories ever told. I think it has everything. When I was growing up, I watched it and was totally thrilled and chilled, even by the musical version. I found images in that chilling with Marley, and the versions where you sort of see nods towards hell in Scrooge's fate. And of course, the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come. But all these things aside, I mean, I'm obsessed with ghost stories. I'm obsessed with ghosts. But all these things aside, I just think it is a perfect story. The structure is really, really wonderful. The dialogue is out of this world. And when you hear the dialogue in, let's say, the Muppets version, which, by the way, I think is probably the best version.
I agree.
When you hear those lines from Dickens, there's something very comforting, very warming, and I think it highlights the genius of Dickens. The other thing is that, and this, as I get older, the political stuff in A Christmas Carol, the stuff about, let's try to treat people better than they're currently being treated. Let's, those at the top, those in power, those with money, perhaps share some of that power and money, and help people who need their help. Um, uh, because seems to become more and more relevant. And so when I'm performing this show, and as you said, we did it for the first time in 2018, it seems to be more and more pertinent. The lines and the resonances within the story, which are more or less faithful to Dickens' original text, I should say, are so resonant. And people come up to me afterwards and talk to me about that. It really feels like a timely moment to do A Christmas Carol, which is, when you think about it, it's remarkable because it was in 1843, I think it was first published. So I think it is utterly timeless. All of that serious stuff, it's also heartwarming and magical and fun and funny, and it has all these elements that you know only someone like Dickens can really pull off. I think it's funny and silly in one moment, and then the next moment it is mortally terrifying and deals with death in a way that I haven't really seen in many good ghost stories. Yeah, I could talk about it all day, how much I love it and why.
Yeah. Well, what have you done a little bit differently though? Because I mean, everyone people seem to do a different. Well, you spoke before. You could do a musical version, the Albert Finney one, which I thought was very very good.
Yeah,
It was a little bit different, but it was fun, and the music was actually really quite good. I only saw it a couple of years ago, and
yeah.
for the first time. And of course, the Muppets. We all laugh and say the Muppets was the best version, but in some way, it actually was because it's actually using the same text, and it's not hard to use the text, but people tend to want to muck around with it.
I totally
Have,
agree.
have you mucked around with it?
We've remained really quite faithful. So I think one of the things that actually uh, sets our adaptation apart is that it is really faithful, which sounds a bit odd, doesn't it? But in terms of the language, because my theatre companies, it's storytelling based. So we do a lot of my shows are kind of storytelling with theatrical moments brought into them, and that's our sort of USP, if you like, as a theatre company, the Book of Darkness and Light. But yeah, I remained incredibly faithful to the text. My writing process, my adaptation process, was to look at the full novel, which of course is available and in the public domain. And I sat down with it and I thought, right, this is far too long for a 90-minute stage version. So what would I do? How would I approach this? And so I started, and this was such a daunting and horrifying task in itself, editing Charles Dickens, which was, my goodness, can you imagine anything more arrogant? So I had to ignore that part that was going, this is Charles Dickens, everything is sacred, everything is brilliant. And I had to just attack it as if it was a long piece of writing that I had done. So in that sense, it's really faithful. There's a few things where we papered over the gaps, and there are a few extra lines here and there that we've added, but still chime with Dickens' style. The other thing is, and the other, I guess, unique part of our show that makes it, I think, a really special adaptation is that I hone in on the ghosty stuff. So I hone in on the visitations, and I look at the each of the four ghosts that pay Scrooge a visit, and I think, okay, so what can we do both with the text, and there's so much gothicism in the text, there's so much brilliant ghostly writing in those visitations. What can we do theatrically though? So we use recorded voices, we use an immersive soundscape, and we really make it a very chilling experience at those moments. And because, as I say, I think this story is genius, you have the light and shade all the way through the piece, which means you come out having seen, I hope, a really exciting, thrilling, chilling, and heartwarming adaptation of this classic. But yeah, it's the gothic in there that really spoke to me. So the scene where Scrooge sees his own dead body in front of him, that's absent from quite a few versions of this, particularly the lighter and more family focused versions. It's not in the Muppets version, for example, but it's one of my favorite scenes where Scrooge is looking at his own dead body, and he talks about how the cover is so carelessly adjusted that the slightest raising of it, the motion of a finger on Scrooge's part, will disclose the face. And then it says that he longs to do it. He longs to take the sheet off and see this dead body. And I'm reading that, back in 2017 or whenever I was putting it together, thinking this is some of the darkest stuff I've ever read. It's so chilling. And then, two scenes later, Scrooge is skipping about the room and calling to, a boy down on the street, asking him what day it is. So yeah, I think that what people will find in our version is that honing in on the darkness, the gothic, the
Mm.
ghostliness. Yeah.
So it's more of a ghost story than, say, a musical or family fun that you other expect on
Yeah, ours
TVs.
is. Yeah, I mean, I think like I never know with these things. So we tend to set our shows at either 12 plus or 14 plus, depending on the show. But to be honest, we've had young people come. We make it, it's up to the parents essentially. You know your kids better than we know your kids. We wouldn't stop you coming, but we would say, look, this is ghostly and it is a bit scary and it is a bit intense. If young people are really into that, definitely great, fantastic. But it's more aimed at, I guess, an older audience, let's say. Yeah, because it is that little bit more sinister, that little bit more creepy. Yeah, and there are some jumpy moments, and yeah, I'm really proud of it. So it's a
How have
really
you
good show.
how have you improved it since you started? So this is the third version of it that you've done.
Yeah.
What have you learnt during that process?
Such a good question. I mean, I think that first I didn't. It was an experiment in 2018. We had no idea like whether it was going to be liked. We had a following. And that following. I'm so delighted to say keeps growing every time we do a show. But I didn't know. I've only ever done my stuff. I know my stuff. I know how to perform my stuff. Never done a classic. So I think what I learned in the first few shows when we toured it was actually people like this. They want this story. It's popular for a reason. And so I guess what I did is I really just lent into it. It's a little different from our other shows. It's a slightly more it's a slightly lighter in places, certainly, but there's levity all the way through it. So my character in my usual shows is the storyteller, and he's this very dour undertaker like character. But that wouldn't have worked for this show. So what I learned was actually having a bit of levity um, doesn't detract from the ghostly stuff at all in this particular production. It adds to it. So there were things like that. The other thing is that I just know this backwards and inside out now. I know it in my sleep. The words are sort of so imprinted on my soul. So as I think any performer will tell you that, on the last day of a run, you sort of think to yourself, okay, that's how you do that bit then. Oh, okay, yeah. And part of me anyway, always wishes I could go back. But with Christmas Carol, we keep revisiting it. So I start to, I think it's my best performance that I do because I inhabit those words so much. They're part of my soul. The other thing that's different about this year and possibly in subsequent years, is we've usually had a touring musician. So we've had a live musician with us, which is really, really wonderful. This year, for various different reasons, one of them being that the space itself is very cozy and intimate. It's just me on stage. So in 2020, in the sort of height of the COVID pandemic, I was asked and commissioned to do an audio version of our adaptation of A Christmas Carol by Harrogate Theatre. And the fun I had putting that together, in this awful period when things were just felt so bleak in lots of ways. But I sat at this desk and I created this soundscape, and I created an audio version, like an audio book version, which then was played live to audiences up and down the country, and they could sit in front of their TV with these visuals that I put together as well. So this version, I've borrowed the immersive audio from that audio version of the show. I've borrowed the audio from that so that we've got this live soundscape. And the previous version had the soundscape in elements, but this particular one is really immersive. You've got sort of the streets of London happening over here. You've got the Cratchit's kitchen noises. You've got carols sort of underscoring everything, classic traditional carols. You've got kind of sinister tones happening that perhaps you're not aware of consciously when you're watching it. The voices of the spirits, and I think that this. Yeah, I'm really, really excited to let this one hit the stage and to get people's reactions to it.
That sounds good. Have you been inspired? Like you're playing Scrooge, so have you been inspired by any other people that have played Scrooge? Maybe an Alistair Sims or Albert Finney. Who have? What's? How have you? What's your Scrooge like?
It's such a good question again. So I'm playing everything in this one. I'm playing the storyteller who is it's not Charles Dickens. I made a conscious decision to sort of go. I'm not playing Charles Dickens. That's not the idea of the show. If you see what I mean, I'm sort of playing a storyteller of the time who is doing the narration as well as playing each of the characters. But Scrooge, of course, is a huge part of it, and it is all of the characters are characterized, so it's not just a reading. I sort of inhabit each of the characters. All of the people you just mentioned absolutely are huge inspirations. I genuinely think it's Michael Caine's role of his entire career. Like I think it's my favorite Michael Caine in all of his career, which I don't know how he would feel about that if he heard it, but I think it's astonishing. Albert Finney,
Well,
absolutely
he
brilliant.
played it very straight. Michael Caine said he played it straight, so maybe that is why it's so wonderful. He's not hamming it up with the Muppets. He's doing it as he would do.
Taking
It's
it
a,
really seriously. I try to let that nastiness come out. Yeah, somebody made a comment about the audio one. A positive comment. They said something about how um, my Scrooge sounds ill. He sounds poorly, and that they felt was indicative of his meanness outside of
mm.
the meanness he gives to people comes back to him and it makes him ill. And that was in I think that was in a review. It might have been Reviews of or something for the audio version. So that's what I try to do. I try to. I love that comment so much because it was in my sort of process of pulling it together, but I hadn't consciously thought about it. But I tried to, yeah, I just try let the lines characterize him. That's what I did initially, and now again he just feels like such a big part of me. But genuinely, like everybody you just mentioned is it's hard because sometimes I look at those clips, I look at Alistair Sim, I look at even Patrick Stewart's performance, which I think is amazing, but it's a lesser known one, I think. Um, and I look at what they're doing, and I look at what they're saying, and it there is a commonality in all of the Scrooges you see, and I think that's because the character is so well rendered by Dickens. So yeah, I try to let the sort of script guide me, but now in this third iteration, it sounds a bit of a dodge, but I don't really know what I do. I just do it.
Mm.
It's so like it's so in there now. It's so in the bones.
So you were saying you like doing ghost stories because
Mm,
that's your thing, and you've done this because it's such a cool ghost story to do.
mm.
Would there be any other writers that you'd like to do on the stage?
Well, that is a good question as well. So in January, I'm actually going to be doing the first tour of a show called Haunted. That's January 2023. But we think we're going to tour this on, beyond that as well. And we are doing The Monkey's Paw by W. Jacobs and The Upper Berth by F. Marion Crawford. Um, my theatre company, we've started to do increasingly bigger stuff, which includes kind of bigger budgets, more performers on stage, more musicians, all this stuff that is both expensive and takes longer to do and to plan. But this is what I do. This is the main thrust of what I do. So my producer and I, who also is the director of the show, Dick Bonham, we said, well, what like maybe we can do something in between these bigger shows, like A Christmas Carol, that equivalent and that size that allows us to do more stuff all year round. So that's what we're doing. Initially we were going to do 4 ghost stories. Kind of realized that wasn't going to work out, and it would have been making 2 shows at once, which too
Yeah.
much to do. But yeah, I mean, I and that was kind of invigorating as well to go to those stories and not, you never want to be so arrogant as to think, well, I could improve these stories. And that's not ever my approach. My approach is, how is it going to work theatrically?
Mm.
I've got an audience in front of me for however long. It's got to be engaging. It's got to be, um, you can't leave it to fester for too long. So although you might have some beautiful long pieces of description in classic ghost stories, that might not work on stage because you're being told a little too much. You're not seeing enough. So yeah, my attention is very much on what other classic stories would work well on stage. When you work in film and when you work in theatre, I think your brain automatically goes, okay, like how would that look on stage? I'm always thinking that when I'm reading classic ghost stories. And now we might have a bit of an in to be able to do that with some of them with this project called Haunted. Yeah, so I'm obsessed with ghost stories. There are many that I'd love to perform.
And that's great. Are there any sort of like what are the type of ghost stories you like? I mean, you seem to like the gothic type stuff, and you just mentioned a few people's names there, like the Monkey Paw, and which is probably less of a ghost story than a
Mm,
weirdy type of
yeah,
a twisty tales of unexpected type thing.
yeah.
Are there who are your favourite authors besides Dickens, obviously, and you just mentioned a few other people?
It's very it's a very obvious route to say Mr. James, but Mr. James, because Mr. James is astonishing and very actually probably the yardstick in terms of the English ghost story. I would say, I think you can't really talk about classic ghost stories without mentioning Mr. James, and that's not just because of some sense of reverence. I think he's just astonishing. He's just the best. I also adore E. Nesbit. I think E. Nesbit's ghost stories are sensational, so full of humanity. I love Amelia B. Edwards is a ghost story writer that if you know her work, you'll be obsessed. If you don't know her work, then you should check it out. She was an amazing woman. She was an Egyptologist and a travel writer, and incredible woman. I love people like A.M. Burridge. I love E.F. Benson, of course, Edith Wharton. Yeah, there's a it's like an endless list, basically. More contemporary people like obviously Robert Aikman. Again, whether we'd say they're ghost stories, don't really know. But yeah, I'm obsessed. I have a podcast called the Ghost Story Book Club, which I have guests joining me, writers, primarily to talk about ghost stories, and it is the nerdiest and loveliest thing that I
Doesn't sound nerdy. It sounds the coolest thing. I don't know
yeah,
about that.
I,
That's
I
nerdy.
say nerdy with love in my heart and proudly, by
Yeah.
the way.
It's an awesome thing. We'll make sure we mention that in the show notes because I want to find out more about that as well. I want to listen to it, and I'm not a
Thank
nerd,
you.
so yeah. So there you go. So you've got lots of things going on. You've got
Mm,
Christmas Carol coming up. Now I'll ask for the details in a sec. Then you've
yeah.
got Haunted in January,
Mm.
and whatever the next thing you do. So tell us, give your little plug. Where, and when can people see A Christmas Carol?
So Christmas Carol is at Barons Court Theatre, which is in West London, and that is the 7th to the 24th of December. Every day except Sundays and Mondays, and there are matinees at 2:30 on Saturdays as well. So Christmas Eve we have a matinee. So even if people are outside of London, I really, really would love them to come down and see it if they can. It's worth the
It's
train.
Barron's Court. It's not hard to get to. It's on the
So
tube.
easy.
It's very easy to get to, and I just put the little there's you there looking
Thank you.
a bit serious, but that's
My
what you
shoulders
do.
either side of it like that as well. It's like a huge
Yeah,
moving
it is.
poster.
And I showed that one before. I put that one up there, so that's you looking a bit. I don't know what you're doing there. I don't even know if you're Scrooge or who you are because you're playing lots of different characters there.
You'll have to come see the show to
Have to
find out.
definitely do that. So once again, Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you.
It is.
Thank
That's my
you.
second Merry Christmas now. I probably won't
Yeah,
say it now for a while, but
yeah.
for at least for this moment in time, it's almost Christmas. We're getting excited, and we're getting excited to see Adam Z. Robinson, Z. Robinson, ZZ. I can't remember what you say.
I,
Robinson.
I say Zed, but I'll
I
answer
don't
to
know.
anything.
I don't know. I always get muck up nowadays. Anyway, Adam, we'll look forward to seeing you in A Christmas Carol.
Thank you so much. Nice one. Cheers. Thanks.